We'd like to thank our three generous sponsors for our book club event tonight. Kirkring Barberio, Sarasota's premier CPA firm, providing a variety of tax, audit, and accounting services to businesses and individuals. Williams Parker, attorneys at law, committed to clients, service to community, and devotion to excellence in the practice of law, guiding principles for nearly 100 years. And we also welcome our newest sponsor, the Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce, a bridge that links businesses, organizations, and residents with innovative programs that strengthen Sarasota's economic vitality and quality of life. Thank you. Tonight, we're pleased to have Tampa area business leader Will Weatherford leading our discussion. Will is the managing partner of Tampa-based Weatherford Capital. He served in the Florida legislature from 2006 to 2014 and was Speaker of the Florida House of Representatives from 2012 to 2014. At 33 years old, he was the youngest Speaker of the House of any state legislature nationwide. Today, he also serves on multiple for-profit and nonprofit boards and is co-chairman of the Super Bowl 55 host committee. So thank you so much for being here with us tonight, Will, and leading our discussion. So would you kick it off for us with what grit means to you?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And welcome to everybody. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm really grateful to the Business Observer for doing this. I think it's such a great idea. I mean, we're living in such an interesting time in our nation's and our world's history. And having these moments of reflection and talking about things that have influenced our lives in a big way, I think is really neat. So I just feel blessed to be able to participate. Greer, really appreciate the kind introduction. And I'm looking forward to this discussion. And that's what I want it to be. I want it to be a discussion. I have no plans to have this be preachy or me giving just my opinion about what I think grit is or what I think Angela Duckworth's book really unearthed for me. I want to hear what it unearthed for you. And hopefully we can share some things together. I know in the last book club, the book of choice was Start With Why. And in fact, Start With Why is one of my other favorite books. And I think grit is a perfect follow-on because understanding your why, being able to articulate your why and to amplify your why is an incredible thing. And I think it does allow people to gravitate to you and to buy into what you're doing. It's a great way to build a team and excel. But we all know that even when you have a why, and even when you know exactly what you want to do and you shout it from the mountaintops and it's something that people already believe in inherently, it doesn't always mean it's going to be successful right out of the gate. Life inherently is full of challenges. It's full of things that are unpredictable. And I think grit and what Angela Duckworth unearthed in this book with her research is something that has to be married with and tied to your why. And so really excited to kind of talk about this book after the last one. When I was recommended to this book maybe 2.5, 3 years ago. And at first I wasn't that excited about it. I thought it was just kind of an interesting title, but I thought, okay, I get it. Grit, you got to be able to push through. Everybody knows that. It sounded very intuitive. But what I immediately learned when I read it was something I'd never thought about before, which is we spend a lot of time thinking about, and sometimes maybe even having insecurities about, am I smart enough? Do I have the right degree? Do I have the right skill set? Am I good enough to do this? Am I good enough to do that? And I think we spend a lot of our time focusing on things we don't control, maybe decisions we've made in our life in the past, pathways we're already down, as opposed to recognizing that there's a very clear parallel between someone's ability to fight through adversity and their success in life. And I just never thought about it. And honestly, I never had the honesty with myself to say, what are some of the challenges I've gone through? What's some of the adversity I've been through that's maybe made me who I am? I think sometimes we bury deep down inside those challenging, ugly moments that we've all had. Could be in your personal life, could be in your professional life, but we tend to bury those because they hurt. Remembering those things can be painful, but it really has so much to do with the fabric of who you are, and has so much to do with the elements of grit that you've created over time. And so everybody knows, when we see someone who's successful or someone who's done something in, material in an industry or in their career, we focus on their highlights. who are like, oh, well, they graduated and got this degree, and then they were this and they were that, and they had this title, or they made this amount of money. We never talk about the really challenging things that they had to go through to get there. And so I love this book because it forces us to have that discussion. So that's the discussion I want to have with you all today, and I'm excited to hear your feedback. So I have a poll question for everybody. I thought I'd kick it off with this. And the first poll question is, do you think of yourself as a gritty person? We'll see what the results are here.
I think there should be a third option.
Look at that. Okay.
Not always, not yes,
Yeah.
not always no.
Yeah, I like that. It's true. Well, and I think the book unearths that too, right? It talks a lot about how there are times we're gritty in certain areas of our life, and then there's other areas where we're not. So overwhelmingly, people feel like they're gritty. I'd love to hear from anybody who wants to volunteer, who considers themselves to be a gritty person. Just, pipe up, tell me why you think you're gritty. Give me some examples of what you think it is in your professional or personal life that's given you some grit. Let's not have everybody volunteer once, but 9 out of 10 of you said yes. Yeah, go ahead.
So for me, I think it started when I was younger. I was bullied. I was very heavy growing up, and I've come from an Italian family where eating is like, second nature, and it's important, and you finish everything on your plate. So that kind of set up a lot of like not eating healthy and things like that. And so growing up like that, I was, bullied, and that, I mean, even in my own household, I have a brother that's 2 years older than me, and it was always, he was going to be first baseman for the Yankees. That didn't work out, but he was always the star sports guy. Like I didn't really feel good at anything, and I tried to mimic what he did. I was a horrible softball player, but I found basketball, and like now, like what that taught me, whether it's business or personal, like I have that, don't tell me I can't do something. Like, and even within myself, it's like, okay, I don't think I would ever go skydiving, but if you invited me tomorrow, it's like, you know what? Because I don't think I would do it, I'm going to do it. And so I feel like it's like that competition within myself that, you don't have, like, I think the book for me, it was just like, especially about like when they were talking at West Point, you could be the best athlete or the best this, the highest academic. But that doesn't mean you have the grit to get what it takes to get into West Point or even survive, that transition period. And so it feels good to know there's something out there that you don't have to be the best at, but there's that thing inside that just drives you. So that's what it kind of drove me to.
Love that. That's great. Thank you for sharing that, Danielle. That was wonderful. Now, I noticed there was a few, this is a little tougher. There's a few of you who maybe consider yourselves not to be gritty, and maybe you're a work in progress on your grit. But would anybody like to pipe up and talk about maybe why they don't think they are? Yes.
This is Leanne Chung in Sarasota. Thank you, Will, for presenting. Earlier, what Danielle was saying about her brother's example of the New York Yankees, I long time ago wanted to be an astronaut, but there was a height requirement. I mean, seriously, I'm not even 5 foot tall, but there's a height requirement to be an astronaut. So I'll first share with you where I'm not gritty and where I believe I am majorly gritty. So where I feel I am clueless of having any grit is social media, digital platform, and Emily Walsh is a queen when it comes to digital, social media, all that other fun stuff. So I'll give her a lot of credit, a lot of grit for that domain. I am clueless in that area. But where I have grit, I did not become an astronaut, but I became an engineer in construction. So I believe that I kick ass on the job site. So Mark Gordon might be able to appreciate that. So yeah, I love being on job sites. I love buildings. I love buildings becoming landmarks, even in your neighborhood. Well, I've had a lot of economic development in your area several years ago, so definitely generated money in your area. So, but yeah, I think, like you said, you can have grit certain areas, but in certain domains, I'm clueless.
No, I think and I think we all have a little bit of that. We'll talk a little bit about that later. One thing, Leanne, I'll give you one piece of advice. I'm no expert on social media either, but generally my communications advice to anybody who asks me is this: there's a secret sauce to all things that are, PR and communications oriented, and it's authenticity. And I think the people who have the best social media or the people who have the best public relations skills are the people who come across kind of projecting who they really are the best. And so I would say you don't have to fabricate anything on that front. I think just being who you are, but finding a creative way to show that in your social media platform will pay big dividends. So anyway, just a quick tidbit on that. I will share with some of you. I mean, I appreciate your feedback on that, Danielle, and sharing your personal story. When I was 15 years old, I come from a family of 9 children. And there's 7 boys and 2 girls in my family. My brothers and I all played college football. I was by far the worst, even though I was the oldest. But my youngest brother got cancer when he was 2, and his name was Peter. And Peter lived at the All Children's Hospital in Pinellas County for about 1.5 years. And just in and out of surgeries, chemotherapies, everything that they could possibly do. My parents basically lived, because we were pretty poor growing up, at the Ronald McDonald House, where they basically covered their costs. And my sister and I effectively became the parents of my younger 6 siblings. And my brother Peter, after a long battle of about 1.5 years, died of brain tumors that had spread throughout his body. He was 3 at the time. And not long after that, I was in a terrible car accident where, while I survived, a gentleman who was in the car with me died. It all happened in like a 6-month period. And I was 15 when both of them happened. And, when you're faced with mortality at a young age, and you don't, you're forced to deal with some feelings and things you never thought you'd have to deal with or never understood. And at the time, it was very painful. I think I wrestled with the emotions of losing a brother, particularly one that was that young, and the pain associated with it for a long time. But going through it, having to live for 1.5 years where effectively my sister and I were like raising a family while my parents were trying to save our brother, it established a sense of responsibility in me. It established a sense of accountability. And I, in large part, give it credit for, the only reason I felt like I've been able to lead in other ways in my life. And so it was super painful, and it's still painful to think about and talk about, but it absolutely contributed to the kind of grit that I feel like I've had in my life. And so I think it's those personal stories, and I think we all have them in our personal and in our professional life. But they're hard to talk about, and they're hard to unearth. But when you do, and you actually think about it, you start to realize what an impact it's had on your life. And that's why I love that Angela Duckworth did here, is she kind of went into a ground. I mean, I've never seen anybody develop research like this that showed so clearly how important it is to have adversity in your life, to be able to push through that adversity, and how that would lead to success later. Because and we'll talk about the impact that this can have on parenting and families, because I think it's really this book changed the way that I parent my children, and so it has a lot of impact. But it was very profound to me for that reason. So I've got another poll question for everybody, since the first one we got some good feedback on. What do you think is more important in your professional career? Is it the fact that you have grit, or is it intelligence? And I know, since many of you have read the book already, this may be an easy answer, but I think it's a good topic, because I think the average person, has their own opinion about this, and it's probably different than what Ms. Duckworth would share. And so how about that? We have 100% think grit. But let me ask you, okay, I wish I could have done the second poll question after this. We can do this with a show of hands. How many people, before they read this book, would have said that your ability to overcome adversity or your grit was more important than your intelligence in your professional life? But many of you said, I don't think I would have said that. I I think you kind of like, I would have said I said it. Maybe I would have thought I believed it, but I sometimes would get caught up in thinking you have to have the smartest mousetrap or the best business plan or the right strategy and all the tactics, and you can kind of overthink stuff. And sometimes it's just the ability to push through. And so I love that everybody believes that. But if somebody could, maybe give me some examples of this. Can anybody think of an example of where grit in their life has meant more, that they weren't the smartest person, they weren't the fastest person, whatever reason, how grit helped them do something special in their professional career? I'd love to hear some examples. Roberta, I think you're still on mute. There you go.
Okay, thank you. I think grit with emotional and social intelligence is really what's important. And my career has always been helping large corporations create massive change. So you have hundreds of people that are resistant. Some are pro for change, but it's being able to have the empathy and walk in other people's shoes to help them change that I think is so critical, and support them through that transition. So
that's really helpful. Very, very insightful. Anybody else? I mean, just some examples of where you were able to achieve something not because you had the right business plan or the right strategy or had it all figured out, but just because you were not willing to lose, you were willing to do whatever it took to push through. Anybody got an example of that? Somebody's got one.
I hate to talk again, but
yeah, go ahead.
I have one. This was my role as an HR director before I was at Franklin Street now, and I came in and we were a company of 50, and they were they're acquiring their competitor of 150, and they never had an HR person. And so they hired me, and a week later, they're acquiring this other company. And so I remember being in the interview, and the CFO had told me about this, and it was I was always taught, like, don't, like, just do the best you can. Don't say you can't do it. Just work it out and just get it done. And so I did ask for a temporary person, knowing I'd need to bring a full-time person on, but like, it was, best foot forward, starting it anyway. And, for a company that didn't see the value in having an HR person before, I helped them see that. And so by pushing and making it successful and tying the two companies together culturally too, that was a whole nother spectrum of it. And, it worked out really well. So that was a proud moment that didn't matter what time I got home at night, I was working like 24/7. And I saw the light at the end of the tunnel, and I just needed to prove it to myself and prove it to everybody else. So that's my example.
That's a good one. Mark, did you have something?
Yeah, it's somewhat self-serving because it's the Business Observer, but some of our top 500 issue of the 500 largest companies on the west coast of Florida based on revenue. And it's a very research heavy issue. And I can't see Greer anymore on my screen, but Greer and Kevin and Diane Schaefer, who's here selling ads, it's a gritty effort, but I think it's one of those things you don't really realize it while you're doing it. It's just, the Observer Media Group is a very just get it done kind of company. We're very entrepreneurial, and it's like, we have a task and we're going to get it done. And it just doesn't necessarily require a ton of intelligence. It's just sort of blocking, tackling, and moving and going and going and going. And every year we get to 500 and we're like, how the heck did we do that? It's a lot of phone calls, and you just, it's like sales in a way. We're reporters, we're not salespeople, but you can't take no for an answer, and you just got to keep pounding. And I think it's a really good example of grit from our team.
That's fantastic. Well, I'll give you all a story from me. when I was exiting public service, I started this company with my two brothers who are my partners called Weatherford Capital. And we are a growth equity investment firm. So we try to find companies that have a real good growth trajectory in front of it and try to invest equity into it and help it grow. And early on in our business, I think we had only made maybe one or two investments to date prior to this, and they were smaller relative to this one. We had an opportunity to invest $40 million into a marina company called Safe Harbor that was had a thesis around buying up marinas all across the United States. And we'd been in business like 6 months, maybe it wasn't a year for sure. And so we had never raised anything like close to $40 million, but it was a great deal and we were trying to get our company off the ground. And so we effectively legally committed ourselves to showing up with the money at the close, and we had no idea how we were going to do it. And I'll never forget the pressure and the stress of trying to get that deal done. And it took everything we had and just a never say die mentality. And at the buzzer, we showed up with the $40 million. We subsequent to that reinvested in that company, and we sold it a few weeks ago and closed this week for $2.1 billion. And so it wasn't just us. We had a bunch of partners in that deal, but the company was sold to a publicly traded company, and we were a small part of that. But we had no business doing that at the stage of where we were. It didn't make any sense. It was a stupid thing for us to commit ourselves to it, but we just basically looked at ourselves and said, we're going to make this happen. And we weren't smart. There was a million other people who would have been better to invest in that company and would have probably had the money all ready to go. But we were just kind of blessed to be in the right place at the right time and willing to do whatever it takes to get it done. So we were really kind of fortunate to be a part of that. And it was fun to fight through something that seemed like an insurmountable mountain at the time. Yes, Leanne, yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. And yes, and kudos to Mark Gordon for his top 500. That's quite an accomplishment. I'll share with you, I grew up in Sarasota, and even though I look Asian, I'm Asian. The author of Grit, Angela Duckworth, she's Asian, and she went to Harvard and UPenn. I grew up in Sarasota, went to Columbia up in New York, but I was trying not to flunk out of Columbia. It was so hard. I was surrounded by so many brainiacs. And by the time of senior year, trying to apply for jobs, I mean, all my other classmates had better GPAs. It was just, they knew people in New York City, things like that. And I was just struggling trying to get a job. And it was going to be a career. And I had so much student loan debt, all this other stuff. My mom had already passed away after my freshman year. So she had passed away and, back in Sarasota. And I just was struggling, trying to figure out how am I going to get a job when all my other classmates were much stronger in engineering. I end up applying, and as you will say, I had some grit. I do not know where it came from. And I applied myself, and I ended up getting 5 different job offers in Boston, DC, New York. And I also got accepted to a PhD program at Columbia, which I actually turned down. So I can smile about these things now, but I remember when you're in it, just like Will, you're going, how am I gonna get to the finish line? I did not see a finish line. And at times when I had some job offers, some of my classmates, we weren't that cutthroat. We had a small department in civil engineering. So we would kindly say to each other, hey, if you're gonna turn down the job, can you please recommend me? Because some of our classmates we applied to some of the same firms and some of us were on wait lists. So back then it was not cutthroat and we did help each other out. So yeah.
That's cool. I mean, it's amazing what we can do when we're focused and when we're willing to do whatever it takes. It's another great example of it. I'd love to ask the group, when you read the book, did it have an impact on you like it did with me with regard to children or raising a family, or just, when you're, like I have 4 young kids, they're all under 13, and you just feel this responsibility to prepare them for the world. And yet at the same time, we live in a culture that tells us that we should be like cocooning our children, right? And so our natural maternal and parental instinct is to protect our kids from danger, protect them from adversity, and make sure everything's okay and peaceful, right? It's just a very natural thing. And I'm like reading this book, and I just remember feeling so convicted, like, wow, I've been doing my children a disservice by, this kind of this big bubble that I've been trying to place around them. And I'm just curious and maybe it's for your kids or your grandkids, and even if you don't have kids, you can still have an opinion about this, but I'd just be curious if anybody else was touched by that and they read this book through the eyes as a parent or a grandparent, and what you thought about it.
Yes and yes. And I only have one, so.
Yeah, so what do we do? I mean, let's talk about this for a second. Are we supposed to create adversarial opportunities where they have to kind of fight through some adversity? Do you just, it's going to come? How do we prepare our children? I mean, I just look at the world we're living in right now, right? I mean, it's so confrontational. It is so adversarial right now, where it's such a divided country. There's so many challenges and problems that we know that our children are going to run into. How do we prepare them for that? How do we instill grit in another generation? It's a real challenge, and especially since we live in the richest, most prosperous country in the world, and our lives are, whether we like it or not, the most blessed and most comfortable of any generation in the history of this planet. So in that context, how do we do this? I'd just love if anybody has any ideas or thoughts about what's our role. Jennifer.
Yeah, so I have kind of a silly but relatable example of that. I read this book when my kids were both in high school still, and I went through a divorce, so I applied grit a lot to overcoming that. But in relation to my children, they would come to me and they'd be like, "Oh, Mom, I'm sick. I don't want to go to school today." And at first I was like, "Oh, okay, sweetheart." And I let them stay home. And then finally I wised up and I'm like, "Hold on a second." And I realized, teach them some grit. Like, you got to power through. You can't just call in sick every day. So I told them, I got to the point where, listen, I don't have time for you to be sick today. You can be sick on Thursday. But for today, you got to go to school. If they weren't throwing up and they didn't have a fever. But, ironically, they did it. They buckled up. They went to school. And gosh, by Thursday, they were all healed.
That's right. Well, and of course, now, Jennifer, if you hold your kid home from school for a day for being sick, they have to quarantine for 2 weeks.
Yeah, right.
so I think a lot of kids are coming down with a cough these days because it buys them a couple of weeks of staying home. But no, it's a great example. What else? How else can we apply this? And it doesn't even have to be professionally. How can you create opportunities for grit for yourself, right? So I mean, feel free to talk about it for your kids or for a family member, or just for yourself. How do you go out of your way to create these goals that are kind of sustained? I mean, she talks a lot about how it's easy to have grit in a short period of time, like a real quick goal. And it's real hard and it takes a week and then you get it done. Like, that's not really what grit is. She refers to it as this kind of passion with persistence, So how do we create opportunities and goals in our life that require a ton of passion, but also require like persistence over a long period of time? Does anybody have she gives some ideas, but was anybody touched by that, or any ideas for yourself or others on how do we accomplish it?
I will chime in because this is something that's pretty personal to me. Is I feel like I have to have a goal that's a stretch, like something that's scary. And usually on an annual basis, I'll set at least one of those. And whether it's like a bike ride, that's like a week-long tour somewhere where I don't know anyone and have never been, or whether it's a professional goal that we're not quite sure we can pull off as a team. But that's what gets you in the grit land. If you sit back and do something that you think you can do or know you can do easily, then you're not really pushing yourself. If you push yourself into something that scares you, that's where the growth is going to come.
Love that, Kat. That's great. So talk me through that. So in your mind, because I kind of feel like you can establish grit in a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be a professional goal. It can be a personal goal. But in your mind, does it have to? Do you like having it like a year? Is that like, what's the time frame that you think a goal has to be set? And it has to be far enough out where you have to sustain something over a period of time, because it's not something you can achieve overnight. But at the same time, if it's like 20 years down the road, it's like you kind of lose focus. At least I would. It's really hard to have that goal. So what do you think is the right time? I mean, how should we measure how long that goal should be? And then how do we know if we're getting closer to it along the way?
That's a really tough one. I think it depends on what that stretch goal is. We have some at the Business Observer that we've been working toward for a couple of years, and we just know that we're taking one step at a time. For example, this book club is one of those steps in a march to a goal that will probably take 3 or 4 years to achieve. And that's how hard it is. It's going to take that long. But we wanted to keep doing it. Even though the pandemic started, we didn't lose a beat. We took it to Zoom, even though these were supposed to be in person, and kind of kept going. So that was the grit with that. But I think it depends on what your goal is, because I think you'll have shorter goals within the longer ones. And maybe some of them are just on a shorter horizon, like a year or 6 months. So I think it depends.
Yeah, that's good. Jennifer, you mentioned a BHAG. I noticed in the chat room. And for those who don't know, that's a big, hairy, audacious goal. And you're right. That's really what this is. And I think, to establish the grit, you can kind of create grit as a group. I think having, goals together, it could be small group, large group, and saying, hey, that's the goal line and we're all going to move towards that. But I think it's important for us to have our own goals individually and establish personal grit for ourselves. So I'm a big fan of the big, hairy, audacious goals, Jennifer, too. And so I don't know if you wanted to expand on that at all, but it's a good point.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Jim Collins and Good to Great. But to add another book into the whole discussion, I recently read Atomic Habits by James Clear. And there he talks about having the importance of having a goal, but sometimes people will have a goal to, say, run a marathon, and then once they run the marathon, they'll stop running. So he says, and I'm thinking about this in relation to grit, he talks about having an identity, thinking about it from an identity perspective. So instead of, I want to run a marathon, I want to be a runner. So it's an identity perspective. And I think that for a long-term grit perspective, it can be really powerful, because then you don't lose the grit to keep on keeping on. And Mark, you're going to love it, because
I love that.
Just started it. And Will, I wanted to go back to something you mentioned about parenting. And I think two parents are on the call that I really admire, Heather and Clint Caston. And I know Heather's experienced this. It's the biggest challenge my wife and I face raising our son, who's 12, is he's too soft and he needs more grit. And I have to fight constantly. And I've talked to Kat and Kevin and my colleagues about this all the time. I fight to not solve problems for him. And, in my family, it's a race between my sister and I, who could be the bigger helicopter parent or snowplow parent or whatever the word is. And it's a challenge for me, because my personality, my wife, we're neurotic in a certain sense, and it's hard to find grit for him. But it's something I think about. I think, Heather, you were going to say something about, because I know your kids are older, and I'm sure you've experienced that.
Yeah, I would just say, Mark and everyone, you're in great company. Clint and I, and Clint jump in on this as well. But yeah, we have a 23-year-old, a 21-year-old, and an 18-year-old. And, I read the book and I couldn't help but look back, and it kind of made me really reflect and think, wow, I really did not do a good job of parenting. Just in that I did, you love your kids so much, and your natural instinct is to bail them out of every situation. Every time they get in hot water, they forget the homework assignment and you run home and get it for them. Or I know there was a couple of times, not couple, but once or twice, my kids literally, we got to school and they hadn't put their shoes on. And I'm like, what the heck are you thinking? You can't, so I drove them home, got the shoes on, took them back, and, the whole natural consequences thing. And unfortunately, I was naive enough to think that when they get to 18, it's like, oh, boom, finish line, we're out. And I know Clint would probably jump in and agree that, even our 23-year-old now, he's coming to us with questions and issues. And And, my husband and I both there's been a couple times when it's been really tough, but we're like, well, gosh, I'm sorry you got yourself into that situation.
Yeah.
But it's tough.
It is. It's interesting because there's been some data on this, but the kids who grew up during the Great Depression 12 years ago and were old enough to appreciate and understand the challenges that brought to their home, and to see your parents get fired from a job, to see people struggle to pay the rent. We tend to want to feel pity for that situation and for that family and that person and that child. What we don't actually understand is that there could be some incredible grit that's being established with that family in that situation and with that child. And so it's like our natural human instinct is to feel sorry for someone that's going through something challenging, and it can be sad, but sometimes that's what's going to make them really successful in life. I mean, I grew up, like I mentioned, 9 kids, very poor. I bet we moved 12 times in 15 years. I mean, like, we moved all the time. We never owned a home till I was like late and in high school. And my dad worked hard and was a good guy, but just like having 9 children is like a big sucking sound. And so he used to like count how many meals he had to provide for every day. And it was 11 times, there's 33 meals a day, by the way. He had to make sure to provide for. And, but the going through, like, seeing my parents struggle, actually, it helped me appreciate the things that we have and the hard work and the sacrifice that they made through that. And so there's a lot of data that these younger kids who went through that ultimately are better prepared for life and the challenges that are going to come at them because they had to witness such a chaotic event. And one could argue that coronavirus and what this has done in our society too, seeing the destruction, seeing the challenges, seeing this like massive transformation just swoop through, trying to explain to your 12-year-old daughter why she's got to stay in the house for the next couple of months and not, run around the neighborhood or whatever. They're going to remember this for the rest of their lives. We're all going to remember it for the rest of our lives, but I think we're creating a whole nation and world full of gritty people based on what we're going through right now. And I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that or they disagree or not, but.
I agree. And I don't have children, but obviously we're all somebody's child. And, my dad ended his career as being, an executive at a company. He was a VP. And it's like, I came home, this was last year, and my husband's like, man, why are you working yourself to death? And it's just like, I want to get past where my dad did. Like, yeah. My dad never got his college degree, and he always said, get your college degree, because I've had to work so much harder than everybody else because I didn't have that piece of paper. And so he would instill that in us. And, just seeing my mom always had to move because my dad, so she was always switching jobs, so she couldn't do her career. And I look back and I'm like, sometimes I'm like, oh my God, there's not enough hours in the day. I don't even have children. So I'm like, quit your belly aching and just go and do it and grind it. And, so that's why it's, and I can't even imagine having 9 kids. Like, yeah. So, I mean, I think you guys the parents don't give each other, don't give themselves credit enough, because I think there's a point where we reach that age and you're just like, you got this aha moment, like, oh, my parents were right. Yeah. Or, my parents always, worked hard, and that instilled it in me. There's so many things that you don't have to sit in front of them and tell them that you're doing just by leading by example as parents. So that's my 2 cents.
No, that's good. I had originally, in planning this session with Greer, you never know how these conversations are going to go, and you can overscript them, and I'd prefer to just have it kind of open-ended. The plan originally was to have a kind of a little breakout session and get into some smaller groups. I think we're a smaller group than normal. Maybe that's because like the entire balance of the United States, perhaps the world, is like at risk. Although I don't think anything's going to change from 5 to 6 tonight. And so I think you guys made the right choice, but I can understand why people are a little distracted. But I think I'm going to change that, Greer. And I think we're small enough. My hope was we were to break out into some groups and give people an opportunity to share, just what's happened in your life that you think has made you a more gritty person? And I shared one of mine personal stories, and I don't, if not everybody feels comfortable sharing it, that's okay. But everybody here that I'm looking at, and even the ones whose names I see and I don't see your faces, you've been through something or you've experienced something in your life that has had profound impact on who you are as a professional, as a father, as a mother, and as a person. And so if you're open to just taking 2 minutes or so, I'd love to just hear some of those stories. So no preference on who starts, but if you, Danielle jumped out there and shared with all of us right out of the gate. And so as anybody wants to follow suit, Roberta, you want to kick us off?
When I started my career, I didn't have a college degree, so I went to school to get both a bachelor's and a master's for 8 years in the evening, working full time. And I was also a single parent. So I raised 2 kids. And because of my career, we had to relocate almost every 2 years. So to me, looking back, that was a blessing because it created that flexibility in our own family unit. And our goals were achieved. And because they had to relocate so much, I think they became more resilient as human beings, but at the same time have really big hearts and never felt entitled, and always treat people as, at least I assume they do, as they would want to be treated. So.
Love that, Roberta. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Yes, Leanne.
My mother was an architect. She passed away after my freshman year, and my life has never been the same. So I always wondered whether I could have become an architect instead of an engineer. I'm like, no, I really don't know how to draw. So, but I shared with college students, probably 10 years out of college, things like that. I've been mentoring a lot of different college students and high school students. And I will admit that my opening up has had these students open up to me in so many ways that they've shared so much adversity. Some of these students have definitely cried to me. And I do not have any kids. I've canceled a wedding. That's a whole nother adversity issue, my issue. But these students, and several of them I still keep in contact with, I have mentored students who've lost a parent, where a parent has committed suicide during college, when they're in college. I've had students, even one locally, he's now doesn't come back to Sarasota because he's lost both parents a year or two after graduating from college. So I've dealt with a lot of different students who've lost a parent or both parents, and to be kind of a mentor to them has been very gratifying. But to have these students try to finish college, try to get a career, and I can try to kind of be a confidant with them has been very nice, because it's kind of healing for me too. I kind of can relate to what they went through.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Thanks for mentoring those young kids. That's awesome. Who else has had grit that's come to them by challenges or adversity? Give me some examples of adversity you've had to overcome. It could be big or small. Clint.
Yeah, I thought a couple things that you talked about might relate. I spent 15 years doing private equity type of deals, and then I spent another 15 years doing different sorts of real estate investments. And I'd love to tell you that I won every single one of them, but of course that didn't happen. And so I made a decision early on in my career that when I came home, my kids were not going to know whether I was in the middle of a good deal or a bad deal. And that had to be the same every day. And I think that really helped me to build my grit. And indirectly over time, Tom Brady actually helped me to crystallize my thinking, in that he's the GOAT. It's arguable, but I'd say he's the GOAT. And I looked him up. I looked at his record. He never won every one of his games. He won 2/3 of the NFL games that he started. He intended to win every single one of them, but he didn't. But he kept going, and he had to keep going. So couple of thoughts there that kind of tie into developing grit over time, and it relates back to some of the parenting things too.
Love that, Clint. And he is the GOAT, by the way.
Yeah.
So yeah, don't worry. There's no debate.
Cool.
He's our goat. Anybody else got anything to share about something they've overcome or
This is
adversity they've had to push?
I'll share a couple things real quick.
Thanks, Brian.
You mentioned moving a lot. So I think my father was in the Army. Growing up in the Army, we moved every year or two. I think that it was a benefit because you have to, that's the normal. You can't complain because it is what it is, and you just move on, make new friends. So it helped a lot growing up that way. That's expected, and you're not in a little cocoon. The structure of the Army and doing things the right way, obviously, is something that not everybody sees, which I thought was helpful as well. And then I was at FSU, and I was 19 or 20. And I was playing golf with my friend and two adult males, and we were talking about things. And by the halfway through the round, that's the point where I realized that my dad knew what he was talking about. So someone mentioned that earlier, when you know you had good parents and you finally figured that out as a child. So my kids are senior in high school and second year at University of Florida. That's kind of scandalous, but it's a good fit for him. My daughter is a swimmer. So she's a competitive swimmer. Back when she started, she did it because it was fun and social when she was 8 or 10, but now she's a senior, and she has the ability and got offers for small school swimming, and that's what she wants to do. And when I listen to audiobooks, when I listened to this book about a month ago, my discussion with her was, so how'd you get here? Back when you were 8 or 10, you started swimming, it was fun. How did you get here? And the conversation was she had to have discipline. She had to get better every day or it wasn't worth it. Perseverance and getting herself up at 4 to go swim in the morning before high school and, stuff like that. So competition in athletics, that's the good thing about it, is if you're going to win, you're going to have to be gritty or you're not going to win. Right. So
that's right. I love that. And thank you for sharing it, Brian. That's great. Congratulations to your daughter. It's pretty awesome. Any other stories anybody wants to share? If not, I was going to mention one more topic. I know we're running low on time here, but my not seeing any, someone used the word identity before, and I've always felt like the most powerful thing that controls our behavior and perhaps our ceiling as individuals of like how successful we can be is our own personal sense of identity. Because we don't know it, but we kind of brand ourselves internally. We put these artificial caps on what we can do and what we can accomplish and where we're going and how far we can go. And identity can be a very powerful thing for good, and it can be a very powerful thing for bad. And I think in reading Grit, what it kind of helped me understand is that, look, life is full of just, challenging shit. Sorry. It just is. And it's hard. And we've all experienced really traumatic things in our life. And I think we're trained to view those challenging circumstances as what they are, painful and hard and sacrifices, but we very rarely look at them as opportunities. And I've always loved the quote that, life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it. But I think it's really attributable to grit, because, seeing a challenge as an opportunity, I think, is one of the hardest things to do. But when you look at like the great level 5 leaders in the world, like look at the people who are just absolutely at the top of their game in whatever they do, they all look at huge challenges as opportunities, every one of them. And somehow in their brain, they've created, we used the word habit earlier. I think we were talking about reading the Atomic Habits book. They have somehow created a habit internally that when they see something that's hard, they almost get excited about being able to tackle that challenge. And I guess, my challenge to everybody here, and maybe it's even to myself, is that, we glean from grit that we're gonna have these issues in our life. We're gonna have challenges, but like welcoming them as opposed to being afraid of them, running to them as opposed to running away from them, seeing them as a way to establish something in ourselves that we will benefit from in the long term. And so that really is something that has stuck out to me. And I don't know if anybody took the grit score test. Any hand raises here? Anybody take the test? So if you haven't, in the book, it gives you an opportunity to get a grit score. And so what I want everybody to do is I'd like for each person to get a grit score. So kind of give yourself a baseline of where you are right now. Take the test. It literally takes 2 minutes, and it'll give you a score between 1 and 5. And then I want you to pick one goal, a really, really hard goal, a stretch goal. It's got to be at least a year out, okay? And then a year from now, I want you to take the test again. And I want you to see what your grit score is. The cool thing about the grit score is you're not born with it. It's not like, oh, this is your IQ. Sorry, this is who you are. The grit score can change. And so I think we should all have a goal of wherever you start from, that a year from now, you're further along. And that's my request, my challenge, my homework. I'll have no idea if you do it. I won't know. But I hope you do. And, you know, my email, make sure my email goes out to everybody that was on this, but I'd love you to just send me a note a year from now. If you did it and you picked a goal, I don't care if you achieved the goal or not. I don't care. I really care about your grit. And did it help you establish grit? And was it reflected in your score? I'd be really curious to see that. And so I really appreciate everybody hanging in there with us tonight. Greer, I know we're got a couple minutes here left, but I hope everybody enjoyed the conversation. And if you have any thoughts, in fact, I'll just give you all my email address right now. It's real easy. It's will@weatherfordcapital.com. will@weatherfordcapital.com. If you want to have like a sidebar discussion about grit, or you have a question about, you know, my thoughts on that or anything else, just shoot me a note. We can continue to have a dialogue. Really want to say thanks again to the Business Observer for hosting this. And I think it's such a great idea. I know we picked a challenging night. There's a ton going on in our world. And we didn't get a chance to talk about it, but I'll finish with this. Our country is going through a really, really challenging time. I mean, I don't care who you voted for. I don't care what the outcome is in the next 24 to 48 hours. This is one of the most challenging times in our nation's history. Probably put it up against, you know, the 1960s or the Civil War being the most challenging. But this is a seminal moment for us. And so the question is our country able to establish grit? Can we heal from this divide, this open wound of our political division? And can it make us a better and more perfect union? Because the ones in the past did. We're still not going to ever be perfect, but we can be more perfect. And you know, for those who couldn't make it tonight, they've got a good excuse. But my prayer for our country is that we use this really divisive time to heal and ultimately to establish some grit as a country. I think we'll be better off if we do. So Greer, take it away. Thank you so much for letting me host today.
Well, thank you. Well, round of applause for sure. That was great insights from you about your own life, and thank you all for being so open about sharing your experiences too. I really liked the book Grit, and we have a lot to think about from the book and from this book club session. There's definitely a lot to ponder in the coming days and think about our goals and our homework from you, Will. And if we're gritty, we will do our homework assignment and not let our teacher Will down. So I'm looking forward to that. And thank you all for coming tonight. As Will said, obviously there's a lot going on, so we appreciate you breaking away from your television screens, your phone screens for a little bit with us tonight. I hope you found it very useful, helpful. I know I did. And thank you again, Will, for being our excellent host tonight. We'd like to also invite you to visit the Business Observer website, which is businessobserverfl.com, and sign up for our daily headlines email newsletter and subscribe to the print edition. We hope you'll become a reader if you aren't one already. And we hope to also see you at our next book club on February 3rd. I'm sure by then you'll be several months into your big goal. So maybe we can talk about that as well along with our next book. So again, mark your calendars for February 3rd. And thank you again for joining us. Thank you again, Will. I hope you all have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you all.